Hey guys, Lewis here with website Bytes and welcome back to another crash course. Today we're covering CSS or cascading style sheets. For those of you who have already watched the previous tutorial or the previous crash course, this is going to help you out immensely because I'm not going to focus on any HTML this episode. I will just be focusing on CSS. So I'm going to assume that you already know HTML and you've already got the correct programs and everything set up. If that isn't the case, I'll leave two links in the description. One to show you how to set up your computer for development, and the second to cover HTML and everything you need to know with that. So as soon as you watch those two videos, you've got your computer set up, you know HTML, you're ready to dive into this one. So cascading style sheets, or CSS known for short, are what the browser uses in order to determine how content looks on the page. So in the previous crash course we looked at HTML and how it outputs certain content on the page, and how you can define things into tables and move things from left to right, put them in divs, nest them inside other divs, everything like that. But we didn't really have a look at changing colors or updating background images or aligning text in the center, in the left and the right, using paddings and margins and things. So that's what we're going to cover today. So I've made a folder on my desktop called CSS Crash Course, and inside of here we've got an index file and we've got 3 images which we're going to come back to later. And then in Sublime Text I have that folder open. I have my basic HTML in here, and then in Google Chrome over here we have that file loaded in, so that we can have a look at everything as we're doing it. So let's move this over just a little bit so we can see a bit more of the code, and we'll get cracking. So with CSS there's 3 ways that you can include it. Okay, the first way to include it would be to do it in line with the actual element. So if you had an H1 tag and we called it this heading 1, and we save and refresh this, you can see we've got heading 1 here, but it hasn't got any styles on it. Okay, so if we wanted to change this text to red, maybe after the H1 tag here we'd do a space and then we'd say style equals and then 2 quotation marks, and anything we say inside of these 2 quotation marks will affect that one element and that element only. So if we wanted to change the font color, for instance, all you have to do here is type color, a colon, and then whatever color you want. So in this case let's just say red, and every CSS argument or every CSS statement always ends with a semicolon. So we'll put in a semicolon, we will hit save, we'll refresh, and you'll see that's now updated that heading to be red. However, if we were to then make another H1 and we say heading 2 and save this and refresh, you can see that that doesn't have the styles because they're only in line on that one element. So, and a way to conquer this, or a way to go around this, is to create a style tag inside of our head here. So inside of our head, underneath title, we're going to create a style. So this is one of the tags that needs opening and closing, and then anything on the inside of here the browser is going to read as CSS, okay? And the way that we refer to different elements in CSS is if it's just a straight element like this, so it hasn't got a class or it hasn't got an ID, you can refer to it just by typing H1. If, however, it had a class, you'd refer to it as dot and then class name. And if it had an ID, you'd do a hashtag and then the ID name. We're going to cover that a little bit later on. Firstly though, we're going to target the H1, and then with CSS you use these 2 curly brackets, and anything you put on the inside of these brackets here is going to be referenced. So we'll go on the inside, we'll put them onto a new line so it's easy to read, and now we'll say color red. And remember, all the CSS elements end in a semicolon. Don't forget that. Trust me, I've learned the hard way. That kind of screws up your entire file if you miss one semicolon, so make sure you stay on top of that. Save that, refresh, and you can see that now both of our headings are red because this style attribute here is targeting H1, so it's basically looking through the entire page, finding any elements with H1, and it's applying this style, so this color of red, to those elements. So that's the way that you want to be doing it. However, if you have a huge style sheet, you have loads of styles going on, this can get enormously long. And so your head of your HTML document will just be pure CSS, which isn't very nice. So the third way to do it is the best way to do it. And I would recommend doing it this way all of the time. So we're going to get rid of the style attribute here, and instead we're going to create a link reference up here. So you've got a link tag. You want to give it a rel of style sheet so the browser knows what kind of a file it is, and to help it out as well, we can also give it a type of text/CSS. So when the browser scans through this, it looks at this link and it says, okay, right, this is a CSS file that we need to load in. And by putting it in the head here, the rest of the page isn't going to load until that file has been loaded. Which is good, because if you think you've got loads of content on the page and without styles, it looks absolutely horrible because it's like a really big blog or something like this, then you want to really wait until the styles have loaded before showing that to the user. Otherwise they'll see just plain text almost like this. So you've given a rel and a type, and the href, this is where we're going to reference a extra file. So inside of Sublime Text, you can right click on your folder and go new file, and then we're just going to call this one styles.css. You can name it whatever you want. You can name it main.css, you can my styles, call it index if you want one for each page, but we're just going to call ours styles.css. And you can see that inside of our folder now we've got another styles.css, and we'll just prove that to you. So inside of here, another file now called styles. And inside of this styles CSS, we will declare things exactly the same way we did over in our HTML document here. So in the href, we will say styles.css, give that a save. And if we refresh the page now, you see those styles are going to disappear because we haven't declared anything inside of here. However, if we were to go back and we were to do the same thing, so we're going to give it a color of red, save that, refresh, you can see that the index page has referenced this style file, and it's looking inside of that file, seeing any kind of style declarations that are made in here, and it's applying them the same way it would if they were in the same file. So that's the 3 ways to use CSS styling. Obviously the best way would be to keep it in an external file. It just helps keep everything clean, keep your code clean, and avoid having huge amount of styles all embedded in the same place, all in the same file. So that helps out a lot. So we're going to get rid of these 2 headings, and we're going to get rid of this. And we're going to take a look at a few different things you can do with CSS first. So we're going to create a couple of divs here. We're going to have a color blue, and then let's copy this a couple of times, and we'll have a color of red, and we'll have a color of green. I'm using Emmet, by the way, which is what's allowing me to say dot and then class name, and then I press tab, and that will create a div with the class of whatever I put it. I'll show you how to install that in the setting up for web development video, so if you haven't watched that, take a look at that. And if, however, you're following along this and you want the code, you can head to the courses page on our website. Again, I'll leave a link to that in the description. You can head over there and you can download all the project files from there, so you can follow along should you wish. So we've got our 3 divs here now: color blue, color red, and color green. So we'll head over into our styles.css, and you can see that these are classes on the div. Okay, so we're going to reference them with a dot. So if we want to reference our color blue div, we're going to say dot color hyphen blue, and then we'll have our open and close curly brackets, and then inside of here we can pretty much do whatever we want. Okay, so the way that you give things a background color is literally by saying background hyphen color, a colon, and then so with this being blue, we can say blue, and remember to end it with a semicolon. Right, now if we refresh this, you're going to see that nothing's actually showing anywhere. That's because a div starts off as 0 pixels wide, 0 pixels high. If there was content in that div, so if there was text, then it would only be as big as the text. There's ways around that. You can declare height and width with CSS. So with our color blue element here, if we want it to take up 50% of the width of the browser, we can say width 50%. If we save that, again refresh, nothing's going to show because it doesn't have a height attribute yet. So we can give it a height. And the good thing with CSS is you can declare width and height in either percentages, so 50% of whatever the browser is, or its parent, we'll cover that later, or you can give it pixels. So we'll say we want it to be 50% of the browser here, and we want it to be 100 pixels high. So we'll save that, refresh, and you can see that we've now got our div here. It's 50% of the screen, and if I was to resize this, you can see that's going to change. So it stays always at 50% width, and the height 100 pixels will stay at 100%. Will stay at 100 pixels high, because that's what we've declared it as. We're going to cover that width percentage and height percentage and everything like this a little bit later on, but just as a basis, that's what we've got there. So I'm going to give it both a width and a height of 100 pixels, just so that we can see our square there, and then we can reference our other ones. So we've got color red, open and close brackets, and we've also got color green. Now with CSS, obviously you can use just stock English language if you wanted to declare the background color. What I'm going to do is just copy and paste these in here, because we want everything to be the same width and height, but we are going to change the colors. So you can use, obviously, as I said, just English. You can use hex values, and you can also use RGB values, which is very handy. So we'll keep blue at just saying blue. If you go onto Google and type in HTML color picker and enter, if you're on Google Chrome, you'll get this fancy dancy little window. Obviously there are loads of others on there, so you can just find one, but if you drag and move about, you can see the colors changing on the left here, and you're also getting a new hex value and a new RGB value showing up every time. So if we wanted red, let's slide this all along to red, move this up to the top right, and this hex value here, so hex values always start with a hashtag, and they're typically 6 characters long. So we can copy this and we can paste that straight into here. So our background color for red is now hashtag FF0000, which is red in hex. And our last one, green, if we was to move that over to here, we can take our RGB value here, which is red, green and blue. Let's copy that and paste that into there. Save that, and if we refresh our My Website now, you can see that we've got our blue, which is in blue thanks to our English language of blue. We've got red, which is being defined as the hex value of red, and we've also got green, which is being defined as the RGB value of green. Each have their own different advantages. Obviously, if you're using English, people are going to be able to understand it a lot easier. If anyone's reviewing your code and they're trying to make changes, you can use English language. It's a lot easier. Hex values, you've got an enormous range of different colors you can use with hex, and it's normally nice and easy just for shorthand, especially if you're looking for a specific color. You can shorthand it quite quickly with hex. And RGB is very good because you've also got what's called RGBA, which is red, green, blue and alpha, and the alpha channel decides opacity. And the way that we're going to change this is when it says RGB here, if we add an A on the end, and then just after this last 0 we put a comma, and then we can define a opacity value anywhere from 0 to 1. So we can do 0.5, save that and refresh. And although it's hard to tell, let's actually drop that down a little bit, maybe 0.2. You can see that this element now is dipping in opacity. So it's currently at 20% opacity, which is 0.2. Which is incredibly handy, obviously, if you're doing color overlays on an image. If you insert an image as a banner and maybe it's really light, so you want to put a black overlay on it, darken it down a little bit, you can do so with RGBA and after elements and everything like this, but that's something we'll cover a little bit later on. So 3 different types of declaration of color there. Obviously, if you want it to be 100% opacity, just hit it with a 1. And there we go, you've got 100% opacity, which is fantastic. So now you know how to do background colors. We're going to move back quickly to the width and the height, and I'm going to explain a little bit what the percentages and the pixels actually mean for the element. So let's here make, we don't want insert, let's make a new element with, let's call it width and height. And then inside of here, let's make another element and we'll call it max height. So we've got 2 elements in here now. We've got a div called width and height, and then we've got another div nested inside of that one called max height. So we're going to first reference width and height, and instead let's make it interesting. Let's change class here to ID, just so that I can show you how to reference a div with an ID instead. So we've got dot width hyphen and hyphen height, open close curly brackets, and then inside of here let's give it a width of 250 pixels, remember the semicolon, and we'll give it a height of 150 pixels. Now see, there's no color defined on this yet, so if we refresh, nothing's going to show up. So let's give it a background color, and we're going to jump back to our HTML color picker here, and we'll find a nice blue, light blue somewhere. That will do. And we'll punch in that hex code there and save. So when we refresh this, you can see we've got a nice div here now. That's 250 pixels wide, 150 pixels high. And then on the inside of this, we've got another div called max height. So the way that you reference an ID is you reference it with a hashtag instead. So we'll say hashtag max hyphen height, and then open close curly brackets, and then inside of here. So we're going to reference the percentage here, and max height, I've called it that because I'm going to show you 100% height. This also works for 100% width as well. So when you say 100% of something, either width or height, it's going to be 100% of its parent. So if we give this max height now 100% height, it's not going to cover 100% of the browser. Instead, because it's nested inside of another div, it's going to be 100% height of its parent, and I'll demonstrate that for you now. So we'll stick with a width of, let's say, 50 pixels, and we'll give it a height of 100%, and then we'll give it a background color of, let's pick a darker blue, so we'll go with that one. And refresh, so you can now see that our max height has got a width of 50 pixels and a height of 100%, but it's not 100% of the browser. As I said, it is only 100% of its parent. If you wanted max height to be 100% of the browser, you'd have to nest it or put it outside of width and height. So I'll demonstrate that quickly for you now. Okay, sorry about that. The cat was meowing to go out. I do apologise. But anyway, if we nest the max height outside of width and height, and then we refresh, you will see nothing's happening, right? So with 100% in this case, what it's doing is it will probably be setting its 100% height to 0, right? Because there's no room for it to move in here. So if we have a look in body, max height, you can see it is indeed setting the max height to 0 pixels. That's because its parent is body, and you can see body is currently this height being taken up by these 4 divs, okay, because these all have fixed heights, and there's no room left for 100%. So what we need to do instead is, with body, we need to give that a height, and you can give things heights of VH as well, and VW, which is viewport height and viewport width. So that's a good way to get the exact height and width of whatever the website is being viewed on. So if we give this now a height of 100 VH, which is 100 view height, you can now see if we were to scroll, this div is taking up 100% of that body space, right? Which is fantastic. So we've got now a div that is taking up 100%, and if we were to take away that div and nest it back inside of here and refresh, you can see it's not taking up 100% of the browser anymore, it's taking up 100% of its parent. A little tricky to get the concept of that, especially when you start working with position absolute and everything, which we'll cover in a little bit, but once you understand it, it's very easy and actually can be very handy as well in some cases. So definitely worth noting something like that. So we're going to move on to images and background images. If you've seen the previous crash course, the HTML crash course, you would have seen in that we referenced images with an image tag like this. And that's fantastic if you just want the permanent image to be there, and you can always hide it. You can change the width and the height, that's fantastic. but you can't really crop anything out with it unless you set border radius. You can't really make it parallax, anything like this. So we're going to cover how to do that now. So one of our images is called landscape. So we're going to create a div called landscape image. Okay, and then inside of the landscape image, so with it being a class, we're going to reference it with a dot, and we're going to say landscape / image, open and close curly brackets, and then inside of here, we're going to use background image to reference this certain image from the directory and bring it into here. First of all though, we're going to want to give it a width and a height, so we'll give it a width of 250 pixels and we'll give it a height of 150 pixels, keeping on with the other stuff then. And the way that we reference the image is by saying background - image colon, and then if you're loading it from an external source as we are, you say URL and then open and close brackets, and inside of here you do 2 quotation marks, and then you can give the directory of your image. So for us, in our case, it's just going to be landscape.jpg, and if we save this and refresh, you can see that it's now loading in our image. But there's something wrong with this image, because the image is so big and it's such a high pixel count that it's only actually loading probably 1/20th of the image and right up in the top left corner. And obviously that's not very handy because we can't see the landscape and it in its beautiful environment. So we're going to utilize a few other background properties, and we're going to first of all say background - size, and we're going to give this a size of cover. Now if we save this and refresh, you'll see that this image now takes up that entire div and it covers the entire area inside of that div, and it's responsive. So if we were to up this height to 250 pixels, save and refresh, you can see that the image isn't stretching, it isn't making black bars anywhere, it isn't leaving some content out, it is completely covering this div, which is fantastic. Now if you keep increasing this, so if we now give this 500 height and refresh, you can see that we're starting to really veer off to the left, because it will scale from the left. So if you wanted to center it, guess what? You'd say background position center semicolon refresh, and you can see we now move the image along, and this is the center of that image. You can set this with pixels as well. So you can say background position 10 pixels and it will move it 10 pixels in from the left. Remember, this is where the left hand side is where it's going to reference everything from. So we're going to change that back down to 150 pixels, save, refresh, and we've got a beautiful image in here. Absolutely fantastic. Looks brilliant. Now let's say that the background size, you wanted to set a specific size for this. So you wanted to say maybe a background size of 50 pixels. And save this, refresh, you can see that the image duplicates, right? Which if you've got a texture background, maybe you've got a repeated texture that you want to lay across the back of the website, that would be perfect. You can just have it replicate. However, if you only wanted the one maybe in the middle of the div and you've got other stuff going around it, then you can say background -repeat colon, and then you can say no -repeat and end it with a semicolon. Save that, refresh, and you can see that it now only loads in the single image and doesn't repeat it anywhere. Very handy. We are not going to have to worry about that though, so we're going to get rid of that, and we're going to set the background size back to cover. Save that, refresh, and you can see beautifully the image stays in there. Now with some websites you've probably come across, you would have seen images be full width of the website, and as you scroll the image stays in the same place, right? That's called parallax, and the way that you achieve that with CSS, let's make another div here. I'm just going to put that on the same line, and we'll give this parallax image, save, and then in our CSS we will say parallax image, open close curly brackets, and we can essentially copy what we've got here, paste it into here, only this time the width is going to be 100%. So we're going to make it 100% width of the browser, and we'll up the height to about 400 pixels instead. So let's refresh this, and you can see that this is now bringing in another image, and we'll utilize one of our other images here. So we'll just call this one path.jpg. Refresh, and you can see we've now got another image in here. And so this is 100% width of whatever the browser is here. You can see that there's actually a white space going around here, and we're starting to get a little bit low down to the bottom. So I'm just going to shoot up to the top, and we're going to cover margins later on, margins and padding later on. So ignore what I'm just doing now. But basically, there's a bit of a margin, so there's a bit of border, if you like, but border's something else anyway. Stopping it from going all the way around. So we're going to get rid of that margin by typing margin 0, and we're going to add some padding to the bottom of about 500 pixels. So when we refresh this, you can see everything budges up, and we can now scroll down because this is all padding here, so we can keep everything in view. So you can see when we scroll, this image is staying in the same place, right? It's moving as you're scrolling, which isn't ideal. I mean, it looks good, right? But it doesn't look nearly as good as it could do. So we're going to press enter here, and we're going to add another attribute called background attachment. And with background attachment, we can give it a variable of fixed. Remember, end it with a semicolon. Save this, refresh, and you see the image is going to zoom in slightly, because now what happens when we scroll is it's basically 100% of the width and the height of the browser. And so this is acting as a viewport now, really, this div. We're looking into that image, and the image is fixed to the background. So as you scroll, you can see that that stays exactly where it is, which looks really good in some cases. You can add maybe a darker overlay over this. You could have some text, a little button, and that could be the banner of your homepage, which would look fantastic, right? So Parallax images are super great to use. You can utilize them in a lot of different things, and they can pretty much add quite a bit of value to the website. So that's images essentially. There's a few more things that you can do with them. I'm going to link the W3 docs in the description down below as well. This is they are pretty much what these crash courses are based off of. So if you have any questions about this kind of stuff, you can head to those docs, and you'll probably find answers to things in there. They'll show you all the different ways about doing things, which is fantastic. So the next thing that we're going to cover are borders. So I'm just going to go away for a minute and type out all the different borders, and then we're going to go through them. I'll talk you through them all, and we'll have a look at each one of them. So I'll be right back about now. Right, that was quick, wasn't it? So I've typed out basically some P classes here, so some paragraph tags, and I've given each one a different class based on the style of border that we're going to give it, right? So if I refresh this now, you'll see we've got a load that have jumped in here, and so we're going to take a quick talk through those and the different border styles here, and then I've got two down the end here as well with the color and the thickness of the border, which we'll cover as well. So with a border, with this being a paragraph tag, you can do the same with a div, an h1, any kind of block level element, even a span, probably even an inline element you can do this with as well. So you define the border as being a border hyphen style, right? So in this case, in the dotted case, we've said border hyphen style dotted. All right, so a lot of these speak for themselves in terms of what you're going to get out of it. And each one can have kind of a different purpose, yeah? So you've got dotted and dashed. Obviously, with these ones, you could have these as almost input fields, maybe, somewhere where someone can put in some information. You've got solid, which also, again, speaks for itself. So solid border the whole way around, maybe used to outline something or break up a bit of content, maybe. Double is a thinner border, but obviously two levels of it. You've got grooved, which attempts to be a little bit like a 3D one. Ridged, which is more like bevel and emboss. So if you've ever used bevel and emboss in Photoshop or Microsoft Word, where it kind of makes the 3D text, that's what it attempts to do here. And then you've got inset and outset. These both almost cast shadows. So the inset effectively tries to make an inline shadow or a shadow on the inside of the div or the paragraph text here, and the outset makes it look like it's coming out of the page, right? So you've got a shadow on the other side. You've also got border style none, which is kind of not needed because the default is none. However, if you have maybe a border on the higher size up here, so on desktop you have a border and on mobile you want to get rid of it, you can do that. Alternatively, you can also say border style hidden, which will keep the border there but just hide it. There's advantages to keeping a border in terms to the box model of CSS, but we're going to cover that in a second. And then you can have a mix of them as well. So you can say, so the way CSS works, this covers margin and padding as well. So I'm just going to copy this and just create another one underneath it. So if you were to just say border style dotted, that's going to take into, and in fact, let's just comment out this one. So to comment in CSS, so you do a slash and an asterisk, and then to end the comment, asterisk and a slash, and anything within comments like that don't get count, they don't get read, right? So if I was to refresh this, you'd see that this I have a mix is just dotted the whole way around now. So border style, again, as I said, this happens with margin and padding and everything like this. So if you just have one variable in here, that's going to assume that you want that to be on the top, the bottom, the left, and the right. If we were to add another one in here, so border style solid, the first one is now the top and the bottom. So there'll be a dotted border on the top and the bottom, and the solid, so the second variable, will be used for the left and the right. So if we refresh this, you see we've got a dotted on the top and the bottom, and we've got a solid on the left and the right. You can take it a step further. So if we were to say none on the next one, this is going to say give the top border dotted, give the left and the right a solid, and give the bottom none. So if we refresh this, you can see the bottom now no longer has a border. And then if we were to give it a fourth one, so let's say groove, and refresh, well, that's very hard to see just in here. It's now saying give the top dotted, give the right solid, give the bottom none, and give the left groove. So you can define a what kind of border you want for all four sides, which is brilliant. We are going to cover that again in margin and padding in a second, but it's handy to know just in case you want to jazz it up a little bit maybe. And talking of jazz it up as well, nice little segment there, you can jazz it up with colors and widths. So the way to define a border color, such as this beautiful red one here, would be to say border hyphen color, and then you can say red, and the same as before where we used hex values and RGB, RGBA, you can also use those in here as well. So you could say border color hashtag 00000, which will give you black, and then FFF, which will give you white. So very handy to know that. And again with the width, it's just border hyphen width and then 5 pixels or whatever pixel count you want. That will give that border that specified size or thickness or width or whatever you want to call it. So all very handy stuff to know. Borders can be handy. As I said, we're going to cover those in the box model now. Well, we'll cover them in a minute after margin and padding, because I know you're itching to know about those. But yeah, very handy. Very, very handy indeed. So speaking of the two big ones, margin and padding, let's make a margin. We'll just call it margin div. So we'll just call it margin div. And then let's put some content in here that says I have 25 pixels of margin. We'll save this, refresh, and you can see we've got a lovely little element down here now that says I have 25 pixels of margin, which you obviously don't. So we're going to go back over to here and we're going to reference our div that we've just made. So margin div, open and close curly brackets, and then inside of these brackets, let's first give it a border. So I'm going to show you the border shorthand here. So if you don't want to say border style solid, border color blue, border color 1 pixel, instead you can say give me one, or give me a border of 1 pixels of solid blue. Right, so it will say border, it will say you want a border of 1 pixel size, you want it to be a solid style, and you want it to be in the color blue. If we refresh this now, you can see our element here has a 1 pixel border, solid, going the whole way around in the color blue. Very handy. And a few other declarations have shorthands like this as well, but we'll cover those when we get to them. Now, margin, you define margin such as margin and with a colon and then a semicolon obviously to end it. And as I said before, if we were to just type 25 pixels in here, save and refresh, you can see that it's moved this entire element in by 25 pixels on all 4 sides, right? And so margin is basically a way of pushing it away from the other content on the page and kind of setting boundaries, if you like, or walls that other content can't come over into, which is handy, especially if you've got big blocks of text. If you give them a bit of margin, push everything out from each other, make things a little easier to read. If you've got images that you don't want all bunched up, you can give them more margins so that they all move about. Now again, this works in the same way that the border style will work in. So if we said we wanted 25 pixels of margin on the top and the bottom, but we wanted to double that to 50 pixels for the left and the right, we can just say 25 pixels and then 50 pixels, refresh, and you can see the top and the bottom margin is going to stay the same, but the size have been squeezed in here a little, taking it to 50 pixels. Which is very handy. Margins can be used to center align stuff as well, so let's cover that now. Let's have another element, or another div even, we'll call it margin hyphen center, and we'll say I am centered. That's not how you spell centered, is it? Centered in the middle. Let's just play it safe. So dot margin center, we're going to give it the same border, so let's copy and paste that in, and then now if we were to give it a margin of 25 pixels, you're going to see that it's spanning the rest of the width that it has available to it, right? Because it is a block element, block level element, a div, so it's going to take up the whole width unless you tell it otherwise. So let's give it a width of 50%. Save and refresh this, and you can see it's now moved over to the left, and this is 50% of the browser, or 50% of whatever space it has to use, okay? But it's not center aligned. So the way that we center align it is we're going to want to automatically set up the left and the right margins to push it into the middle depending on how big the browser is, okay? Which you can see at the moment isn't happening. So the way to do that is by saying we'll give it 25 pixels of margin on the top and the bottom. Obviously you can set that to whatever you want it to be, but then the second variable we're going to set to auto. So remember, with 2 variables in here, it's going to take the first one and assign that to the top and the bottom, and then it's going to take the second one and assign that to the left and the right. So if we refresh this now, you can see that that has moved that element into the middle. So it's kept the top and the bottom at 25 pixels. However, it's automatically setting up the left and the right margins to make sure that it stays in the middle no matter what the screen size, which is awesome, right? So you can use that to center align stuff and have that all set up. And so especially handy with block level elements where text align doesn't work, you can use margin auto. So that's brilliant. One problem with margin though is that you can see this content is quite squished up in here, right? So the border is quite close to the content. So this is where padding comes into play. So let's make a new one and we'll call it padding div. And in here I have 25 pixels of padding. Let's save and refresh this. So we've got our nice div element here, and we'll reference it in here. So padding div, and let's just get rid of these so that we can see that they're together. And then we'll give it a border again of 1 pixels of solid blue. And then now let's give this a padding instead of 25 pixels. Remember to end it with the semicolon. And padding works exactly the same way margin works in terms of syntax, right? So 25 pixels here. This is going to give it 25 pixels at the top, the bottom, the left, and the right. If I was to change that to 25 pixels and then 50 pixels, you know the drill. 25 top and bottom, and then 50 left and right. So that's saved. Let's refresh this, and you can see now this has made a complete difference, right, to how this content is being displayed. So instead of pushing the edge of the boundaries in, what it's done instead is push out from the content. So the content now on the inside of that is a lot more spacious. It's got a lot more room to play about, and quite frankly, it's a lot easier to read, right? Because you don't have to be squinting your eyes, and you don't have to be trying to get as close as you can, or trying to read whatever's going on in here, which is obviously not going to happen. One problem with padding, as I said, it pushes out from the content, right? So if you wanted a fixed width of this, so let's make another one, and we'll call it padding width. We'll just call it for now. And I'm going to say I stay the same size no matter what the padding is. And we'll reference that in here. So we've got dot padding hyphen width, open close, and then we'll give this the same in here. And this time we'll give it a width of 250 pixels. Remember to close everything off with a semicolon. Refresh, and you can see that it's put it in here, which is brilliant. But one problem is that this is not 250 pixels wide, right? So if we were to right click and inspect on this, you can see that this is actually 302 pixels wide. Reference just here, if I hover over it, you can see 302 by 88. And that's because, as I said, with padding, it pushes out from the content. So the width is used initially to define it, but then after the fact, after the padding's been added on after the width has been defined, it pushes out and hasn't got a chance to correct itself. So the way that we do correct that is by giving it a box sizing and border box. Okay, so what we're telling it to do here is when we refresh this, you can now see that this has become exactly 250 pixels. If we have a look in here, you can see that div is 250. And so what it's saying is whatever the sizing attributes are, calculate those after anything like padding has been added, and then add the width. Okay, so it's going to use instead the outside of the div to record what width it is instead of the content, which is very handy. Obviously, if you've got divs that you want to be specific sizes, then this is how you do it. And it's a lot better than trying to play around and trying to wiggle around with content and take it out and put it in just so that everything stays the same width. Instead, box sizing, border box, make sure that that happens for you. So we're going to move on to the box model, which is according after doing the borders, the margins, and the padding. And the box model basically is this thing down here, right? So you've got the content in the middle, and then outside of the content you have padding, and then outside of the padding sits the border, and outside of the border sits the margin. So it's a way of nesting things almost. That probably didn't make any sense, so we're going to make a new div. We'll call it box model, and then we'll say in here I am some content, and then we'll reference that in here. So box model, open and close, and then inside of here is where we're going to put our styles, right? So if we refresh this, you can see we've got I am some content. Fantastic. Now we're going to give I am some content some background color, and we're going to give it a hex value of CCC, which is going to give it a bit of a grey. So refresh this now, you can see our element here, our box model element, has got a background color of CCC. It's quite thin though, so we're going to want to add some padding. So let's give it padding of 25 pixels. Save, and we'll refresh that. You can see that now the content is pushing itself out, so it looks a lot more or a lot wider, a lot taller, sorry. And the content's not budged up right up against it as well there. Now outside of the padding we can give it a border, so we can give it a border of 25 pixels of solid, we'll call it DDD, which is another type of grey. So if we refresh this now, you can see that the border has sat outside of whatever the padding attributes are, to to almost act like a wrapper around everything, okay, which is cool. So that looks pretty smart, I guess. You could play around with some colors, get it looking nice and modern. But if you wanted to take it a step further, you can see that it's still touching this this div above it, and it's still touching the edges, and we don't really like that. So now we're going to add a margin of 25 pixels. Save and refresh this, and you can see that that's now pushing it away from its divs. It's pushing it away from the edges, and if there was anything below it, it would be pushing that away as well. So that is the CSS box model. It's basically a level element that works on basically nesting the content inside of parameters. So you've got content, and then the content is surrounded by padding. The padding is surrounded by a border, and then the border is surrounded by margin. So each have their own good uses. It just comes down to the circumstance that it's being used in, and whether or not it can be used effectively. So in some cases, padding is going to work better than margin. In other cases, margin is going to work better than padding. And then sometimes you just want a border on things, so you can just add a border. But that comes down to practice and experience to know what's going to be used in certain circumstances. So I can't really sit here and tell you, use this for this and this for this. You'll have to go away and have a play about with that yourself and see what you come across. But very handy and definitely something to keep in mind. So the next thing I'm going to have a look at is text formatting. This is another one of those big tedious ones like the borders. So I'm going to go away, type everything out, and then I'm going to talk you through it. So I'll be back in a second. Okay, and we're back. Now you can see that I've added some more P classes as before. So just like the borders, we've made P classes for align left, we've got one for align center, align right, overline, line through, underline, uppercase, lowercase, capitalize, indent, blah 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 blah. So we're going to go through all of these. So if I refresh the page now, you can see that it's added everything in here. All looks fantastic, very professional looking website. But let's go over it. So we'll start with the left, center, and right alignments. And these are very simple. The way that you align text is by defining text-align. So you've got text-align left, center, and right, and obviously they all speak for themselves. Left aligns it to the left, center sticks it in the middle, and right aligns it to the right. Self-explanatory there, fantastic. Overline, line through, and underline refer to these three here. So overline obviously is going to add a line above the text. Line through is going to strike through the text, almost like you're deleting some text maybe, or something that's no longer relevant. Underline is where the line just sits underneath it. So if you want to emphasize something, maybe put it in bold and underline it. That'll work fantastic like that, and that's just done through text decoration. So text-decoration, and then overline, line-through, and underline. Again, all this code is going to be available in the description, so you can download it, have a play about with it yourself, change some things, see what you can come up with, and learn it. So the next ones we've got are uppercase, lowercase, and capitalized, right? So you can see that the actual text inside of this element, I'm all in uppercase, only has the I capitalized. But we're using the text transform function here, so text-transform uppercase, and that's going to convert all the text inside of there to I'm all in uppercase, okay? Same for the lowercase, so it's going to take everything in here, so obviously the majority of it is in lowercase already, but the I isn't. However, once the text-transform variable has been added and lowercase has been passed as its parameter, we're looking at everything here in lowercase, which is brilliant. And then the last one here, capitalize, basically capitalizes the start of each word in that sentence. So here you can see I'm all capitalized, only has the I capitalized in the sentence. However, when it's printed out here after the text transform, it's capitalized the I, it's capitalized the A and the C, which is cool. So if you've got maybe a user login and you need the first and the last name both capitalized at the start, then text transform capitalized will do that for you. If you've got a bit more text though, so maybe you are writing a blog, most commonly you'll see that it gets indented, right? So with this indent element here, I've tried to fill out a bit of text in an aim to show off the indent, right? In order to do that, I've given it a width of 300 pixels. So this paragraph element is only going to be coming out 300 pixels so that the text wraps onto some new lines here. And in order to do the indent, we're just going to say text hyphen indent, and then you can define an amount here. So at the moment we've got 50 pixels. I can change this to 10 pixels, and you can see it only gets indented 10 pixels. So it all depends really on how much you want to indent. 25 to 50 is probably going to be the best, but that obviously all depends on font size and the scenario in which it's being used in. So that can help users direct and read content. Another thing that might help users read content as well is letter spacing. So we've added another paragraph tag and given it the class of letter spacing, and then inside of here we're given it the variable of letter spacing and the parameter of 2 pixels. So that's this one here. You can see that the actual text in here, this text has some letter spacing. It looks normal, looks exactly the same as all the other text, but once this has been added to it, in between each character, or each letter in this case, it adds 2 pixels of padding, right? So it doesn't have to be as extreme as 2 pixels. We've just done that to demonstrate it. Drop it down to 1 pixel, and you can see it's starting to separate up the text a little bit. So instead of having everything all bunched up like it is here, which makes it hard to read for some people, you can instead separate it out a little bit with letter spacing, and that helps people a great deal when it comes to reading. With pixels as well, with any of these, you don't have to stick to whole numbers either. So if you wanted 0.5 pixels, you can say 0.5 pixels, save and refresh, and you can see it. Well, you can't see it because it's sort of very small, but this is now 0.5 pixels worth of letter spacing. So you can really fine adjust things like this and get it working to exactly how you want it to be. Another thing that can help readability is line height. So you can see this paragraph here is pretty much the same paragraph as this one, and we've defined that here. So we've given it a width of 300 so that the text falls onto some new lines, and this time we've given a line height of 30 pixels. So the line height, basically, if I highlight this, you can see the line height is this whole blue area here. Okay, so the bigger the line height, the bigger that blue area is, and the farther apart each one of these lines is going to be. So again, it doesn't have to be as dramatic as this. We can drop this down to maybe 20 pixels, save and refresh, and in fact 20 pixels probably seems like what it was before, so let's go 25 pixels, and you can see it helps separate up the text a little bit. So if you were to do that as well as letter spacing, your website is instantly going to be a lot more readable to a lot more people, who can't really digest information as dense as that. If you space it out a little bit, it just makes it nice, easier to read. If you want to jazz some things up, maybe you can add some text shadow, which is exactly what we've done here. So we've got another paragraph tag. This text has some shadow to it, and you can see with the text shadow, we've given that text hyphen shadow, and then you've got 1 pixel, and red. Now these two 1 pixels refer to how far over to the right it is and how far down it is. So if we were to change this first one to 10 pixels and refresh, you can see the text is now, or the shadow even, has moved 10 pixels to the right. If we were to change this other one to 10 and save, you can see it's now moved 10 pixels down as well. And then the red, of course, is just the color, and you can change that with hex values, RGB values, as I've said before. So although in a small scenario like this, it doesn't look fantastic, if you set it to black and maybe have it spread out a little bit more, it can be really effective for putting a soft shadow behind some text, make certain text stand out like it does there. And obviously, if you're bored of using Times New Roman, which a lot of us are, you can define different fonts to text as well. Now, each browser comes with web-safe fonts. So the way to find out the best ones to use would be to simply Google web-safe fonts. And if we just go to this first one here, 15 best web-safe fonts, you can see that it gives you a list here, 1 to 15, of loads of ones that are in there. Now, what WebSafe basically means is, obviously there are thousands, if not millions, of different fonts out there. They're all looking, completely different to one another, and some have icons in that others don't, and everything like this. But not every browser is going to have the capability to store all those different fonts, right? That would take years, and the files would be massive, right? So instead, it has a select couple that are quite different from each other, so that you can kind of find one of these ones that suits you best. So for example, you've got Arial, which is used mostly for copy. If you've ever written copy, if you've ever used Microsoft Word, Arial or Calibri is probably one of the fonts you've used. Helvetica, very similar, although it's different style, so you can see this is a lot sharper. Times New Roman, Times Body Copy, so this is a little bit thicker. And then you've got some quirky ones like Courier New, which is kind of code. Courier, which is almost round and soft, and you can see you can keep going on and on, and each one of these is different. Oh god, Comic Sans, never. Yeah, don't use it. It's kind of fugly, this is true. But you see you've got some bold ones here as well. So there's loads of different fonts that you can use, WebSafe, and the way that you refer to those fonts inside of your file is by giving it a font family. Okay, so I've made a p tag here, given it the class of font, and given it some content. I'm in a different font, which is this one here, which you can quite clearly see is a different font. And the way we've done so is by giving it a font family, and then we've said use Arial. Now, these other ones here basically say use Arial, but if you can't find Arial, so the primary font to use should be in apostrophes like this, or speech marks, whatever you want to call them. So single quotations or double quotations, it doesn't matter. The first one should be in those, and then followed by a comma and the backup font. So if for some reason it can't find Arial, it will use Helvetica, which is another font. These don't have to be in quotations. You can leave these out of quotations. And then if for some reason it can't find Helvetica, we've given it a third attribute here of sans serif, which basically means if it can't find Arial, it can't find Helvetica, just use whatever kind of sans serif font you have. Just use that, because these are both sans serif fonts. And if you're not sure what that means, have a quick Google. There's different types of fonts out there. You've got serif, you've got sans serif. It basically describes how the font looks, right? Whether it's got curves, whether it's smooth, whether it's bold, whether it's sharp, things like this. So that's how you define the font family, right? You tell it a font, a backup font, and then a style of font if all else fails. And with this, depending on what font you use, you can declare a font weight as well. And this can be done from 100 to 900, 900 being the heaviest or the boldest text, and 100 being the lightest or the thinnest text. So in this instance, we've had another p tag with a class of font heavy, and we've given it a font weight of 900, which is the example shown here. So my font weight is heavy. And you can see it's nice and bold. So if you've got something that needs to stand out, that's what you'd use it for. Italic as well. Font style can be used to declare things as italic. Obviously, if you've seen the HTML crash course, you have things in there called EM or I tags, emphasis tags, or italic tags. So you could probably get away with using those instead. But if for some reason you don't want to, or you feel it's necessary to do it through CSS instead, then font style and then italic is the way that you do that. And then finally, should you want to change the size of your font, which you must want to do, this is done through font-size, and this can be done in pixels. So you can say font size 24 pixels, and you can quite clearly see that this text here is indeed bigger than the other text. The other text is probably going to be about 16 pixels, which is a standard for a lot of browsers, 16 to 18 pixels. So that's fonts, that's text, that's how to format things like that. All very exciting. Obviously, it's useful for when you're writing out maybe blogs and you've got different styles that you want to apply for different text. Yeah, it can be helpful for quite a few things. So definitely worth noting. Go away, have a look at all these, have a different look at the font families you can use, the web safe fonts, have a play about with line heights and fonts and font sizes and everything like this, and you probably come up with some really nice looking content. So yeah, definitely worth noting that stuff. So we're going to get into some more technical stuff now, and we're going to look at pseudo elements. Pseudo elements are most often seen on links. So, you know, when you hover over a link and it changes color, that's a hover pseudo element, which has a different class on it, right? So we're going to make a tag here. We're going to give it a href of http www.websitebytes.uk. Save that. And then inside of here, let's just say, click me. Save and refresh this. You now see we've got a link. Looks exactly the same as any other link, right? So if we were to click that, that's going to take us through to Website Bytes. Fantastic. Oh, what good looking website. Damn, definitely check that out. So you can see that obviously takes you through. It takes you through onto the same tab though, which we don't like. So we're going to say target equals _ blank. Refresh this, which now means this opens in another tab. I go over that in the HTML crash course. If you're not sure what I mean there, go and check that out. But the thing that we are going to talk through is the class. So we're going to add a class of, let's say, link-styles. So we can now reference this anchor tag here by saying .link-styles in our CSS, right? So let's go into our CSS. .link-styles, open close brackets, and then inside of here we can change this. Now I don't like the blue and I don't like it being underlined, so we're going to give it a color of green. Quite a quirky font, this one, quite a quirky link. Save that, refresh, you can see it's now changed to green. And in order to get rid of that underline, because that's standard on many or on all links, you need to give it a text decoration. So going back to earlier, text -decoration, and we're just going to give it a text decoration of none. Remember to end it with a semicolon. And if we refresh this now, you can see that bottom underline goes away. So we're basically clearing off the text decoration and we're defining it a color of green. Obviously it still works. If I click on it, still acting like a link, because it is still a link. Weirdly, it's still a link. So now when we hover over this, you can see nothing changes, which we don't like, right? We want it to change maybe to red when you hover over it. So we're going to type it out, .link-styles again. So .link-styles, and this time before we do our open and close curly brackets, we're going to say colon, and we're going to say hover. Then we do our open and close brackets. So now we're basically saying apply these styles to that element, but as soon as that element is hovered over, apply these styles. So now we're going to say color blue. Okay, and we don't need to redeclare text decoration as none, because it's already going to know about that. This is the first default value it's going to be loaded in, and then an easy way of thinking about it, or which is a very practical way of how this works, is any variables, any styles defined in here is just going to overwrite it in here. So because color already exists in this, the color of blue will just overwrite that. Okay, so if we refresh this and now hover over it, you can see that changes to a blue, because as we hover over it, the element's detected that it is being hovered over, and so it activates this set of the styles that will change the color of it, which is cool. There's two other ones that you can do for links as well. So you've got, if we say .link-styles and then active. So this is useful for a nav bar. So we can change the color to yellow for this one, because we're not going to be able to see it properly anyway. So if we click on this, you can see for a split second there, just as we click on that, it changes to yellow because that is an active link. An easy way to show this off, in fact, would be on Website Bytes. So you can see on our homepage here, the home element, the home link here, because that is the active one, that is being displayed in a darker color than the rest. which is cool. And then obviously as you hover over these go a darker color. So that's how it works. You can use that for obviously your nav bars. You can use it for showing if a link's been clicked. Right, sorry about that. The kitten keeps trying to break into my room. So we've had a look at how to style these links now. So we've given it a color, we've got rid of the underline, we've given it a hover, so we say when it hovers, go to a different color, and we've also said when it's active, so when it's being clicked on or when it's navigating away, change to the yellow, which is awesome. Now, that link, obviously it looks good, it looks all right, but it would be better if it was a button, right? Now there are button elements, which I covered in the HTML crash course, but if you want to make a button out of an A tag, this is where it gets a little bit gnarly. So let's make an A tag in here. We're going to give it the same URL. We're going to set the target to blank again. So underscore blank. And we're going to give it a class of link button instead. So let's save that, refresh, and you can see where we've got nothing because I completely forgot to put click me inside of there. So we've got another one, and you can see this doesn't have the same styles on it because we've got no styles declared for it in here. These are only referencing something else. And so let's close out of that one. And then so instead, what we're going to do is create some new styles for this. And we're going to create a style, first of all, called link button. And with making a button out of an A tag, you can do this several different ways. You could add padding to push out the sides of it. So for example, if we do a background color of #000, so we do a background color of black, and we give it a color of white, and then text decoration none. We save that, refresh. You can see that we've now got a button here almost. If you click on this, it's going to take you to the website. And it's all very close. So we can set a padding of maybe 10 pixels and 30 pixels. So 10 pixels up and down, 30 pixels left and right, refresh. And you can see this makes it into a bit of a bigger button. But if you wanted a specific width, so if you wanted the button to be maybe 100 pixels wide, and you tried doing width 100 pixels, save and refresh, you see that doesn't take effect because an A tag is an inline element, and so in order for you to define a width for it, you have to give it a display of block. So when you save this and refresh, you can see it's going to put it onto a new line because it's now a block element, so it takes up the full width. However, it's now obeying that 100 pixels rule. So you can say width 100 pixels, let's give it a height of 50 pixels, and let's have a look at that, which is awesome. So we've got a width and a height on it now, and we want to text align center so that we can get the text sitting in the middle, and then you can see it's budged up to the top. So the way that we're going to solve this is by giving it a line height of 50 pixels. So 50 pixels line height is going to be the same height as its parent or its div. If we refresh, you can now see that has moved down. Fantastic. So we've got a button, we can click on that, we can take it to our next page, which is awesome. Let's change that to 150 pixels width, just so it looks a bit more like a button. And we can change the styles of this as well. So if we say .link button, and then on the hover state, we want to change the background color to maybe a gray. Let's go over to here. We'll find a lighter gray, 2-3, that will do. Save that into there. Refresh, and then you can see as you hover over it, that background color changes to the overwritten one here. So then as you hover over it, changes, click, takes you to the website. Fantastic. So that's A tags and how to style them into buttons. Obviously that is one thing to remember with the A tags and buttons, is that in order to style them properly, you do need to display block them, or display inline block at least, so that you can set fixed widths and heights to them. But It's only an extra variable. What is it? So let's have a quick look at lists. So let's make a list with a class of uList none. So we're not going to apply any styles to this one. And inside of here, we're going to have 3 elements, which are PHP, HTML, and CSS. So this is what your standard list looks like, right? Now we can jazz things up a little bit. So say you don't like those dots, instead you want circles because circles are cool. We're going to create a new list, uList, let's call it 1 for ease here. And then we'll say 3 elements in here again. We'll use PHP again, HTML, and CSS. In our styles, let's define .ulist1. No. You can do it in caps if you want, but I don't want to. And then we can say, so this is a new one. This is list-style-type. And we can give this one a circle. So we'll refresh this, and you can see that we've got another list in here now. And instead of bullet points, we instead have circles, which is pretty fancy. And if you don't want dots at all, let's go to uList none. We'll reference that, and we can say list style type none. Save that, refresh, and you can see it gets rid of the dots altogether. Cool. So let's take it up a little notch. So you've got your 3 elements in here, but you want them to expand out a little bit. You want them to have a little bit of breathing room. So we can give individual things inside of a class their own elements, right? So let's make another one. Let's make a UL called uList2, and then we'll have 3 LIs again. We'll have PHP, we'll have HTML, and we'll have CSS. Now the way in which we reference something inside of its parent, because obviously if we go in and we say LI background color gray, it's going to look for every single LI in the document and set its background color to gray, but we only want it to happen inside of this one. So to make sure that happens, we can say also in caps again, .ulist2, and then directly after uList2 we'll have a space, and then we'll put LI and then our open and close brackets. So this is basically saying look inside of the element uList2 and pick out every single LI inside of that element. So it's going to look for uList2, which is this one here, and then it's going to pick out these 3 being the 3 LIs within that element. Alright, so now to demonstrate that, if we say background color, we'll give it a gray again, and we'll give it 5 pixels of padding top and bottom and 0 pixels of padding left on the right, and we refresh this. You can see that our list now, each of these LI elements has a background color of gray, and it's been spaced out a little bit with the padding. So so pretty cool. And obviously that allows you to individually style things, and so if we were to give this also a margin of 5 pixels and then 0 pixels, you can see that it's going to separate them all again. Remember that box model from earlier, the margin sits outside of the padding. So pretty cool. But what if you've got an ordered list? So if we go down here and we say an ordered list with olist1, it sounds like a Star Wars character, that, doesn't it? Olist1. And then we have 3 in here, so we'll have again PHP, we'll have HTML, and we'll have CSS. Refresh this, you can see we've got the default one is 1, 2, and 3, which is not very interesting. What if you're a quirky kind of guy and instead you want Roman numerals? Well, thanks to the help of CSS, you can do that. So let's reference it with .olist1, and we want to reference all the or in fact we don't, because we're going to change the Roman numerals side. So we'll reference just olist1. So we are currently calling upon this one list here, and we're going to change the list style type to upper Roman. if we save that, you can see that we're now getting Roman numerals, and that will continue all the way down into the other Roman numerals, all the way through the numbers as you add list elements as well, which is pretty cool. But if you don't like Roman numerals and you don't like numbers, and instead you're kind of a letters kind of guy or woman, then you can also have letters instead. So if we get rid of upper Roman and go with lower alpha, but with only one hyphen, save and refresh, you can see now that we've got ABC. So you've got a huge array of different channels you can go down with things like that. And again, it's one of those things where each one's going to have its own kind of targeting, right? So each one's going to be used for different things, but I'll leave that down to your discretion to use them wherever. So let's quickly have a look at tables, because it's going to show us a bit of concatenation. So let's have a table. Let's make a table row, and inside of that table row we'll have 3 table headings. We'll have a first name, we'll have a last name, and we'll have a date of birth. So we'll make another one. We'll have 3 datas, and the first one is going to be Quentin Tarantino, and he was born on the 27th of March 1963. I've got these written down, these birth dates, because I'm definitely not going to remember these all. The next one we're going to do, Stanley Kubrick. These are all classics, by the way. If you don't know who these people are, you need to get watching some films. Stanley Kubrick. I did Stanley Kubrick in A-level film. Just a quick diversion there. And he was born on the 26th of July 1929. Or 28, sorry. I can't read my writing. And then the last one that we're going to add is, if you've ever seen Kingsman, you'll be a huge fan of this guy, Matthew. Oh dear. 2 T's. Matthew, and then Vaughn. That is how you spell it. And he was born on the 7th of March 1971. Right, save, refresh. So you can see now we've got a table. It looks absolutely amazing. We've got our headings and our first names and last names and the date of birth of these 3 film directors. Fantastic. Truth of the matter is, it looks absolutely bloody awful, and we're going to change that with some CSS. So the first thing that we're going to do is change the font family, because I don't really like the look of Times New Roman. It looks absolutely disgusting. And so we're going to reference table, but because we haven't given table neither a class or an ID, we're going to just reference it using its element name, which means we don't need to do a dot, we don't need to do a hashtag. We can just explicitly reference it there as table. And then so in here we're going to give it a font family. And we're going to set it to Arial, because Arial is a really nice font that everybody uses. And then we're going to set up the back one as Helvetica, backup one. And then if all else fails, go ahead and find a sans serif font. So let's save that, refresh, and you can see it's changed the font of our table now. We're getting there, we're starting to look nice. And now what we want to do is align everything to the left. And probably give it all a bit of padding as well. So this is where we come into a bit of a problem though, because we've got TH, which we're going to want to left align these 3, but we're also going to want to left align the TDs. So instead of saying TH and then open it up and then in here say text align left, and then closing that and going into a new one and saying TD and then text align left, because that can be quite tedious, and when you've got a lot of different styles, that's going to be taking it up. Instead we can say th, so call this class, and then with a comma we can also say call this class. So now inside of this declaration here, it's saying apply all of these styles to the th and the td. So if we refresh or save and refresh this, you can see that now, although only really the date of birth moved, all of these are now left aligned. Okay, although I mean they were before, but they're even more left aligned now because we've done that. So yeah, a better way to do it is probably to give them all a bit of padding. So let's say padding 10 pixels. You can see each one of these elements now, whether it's a TH up here or whether it's a TD, have all been affected by that. And let's again give it a border of 1 pixels of solid grey. Save, and you can see now we've got a nice little elements, little block elements in here. Now it's all starting to look nice, but we want to take it a step further, and we want to have these as white and the background as black. Now you might be asking yourself, hang on, we've defined TH here, so how can we set the background color to black and the color to white without affecting the other ones as well? Well, I'm glad you asked that, Timothy, because you can explicitly reference TH again, and instead what it's going to do is it's going to apply these styles to TH, and then it's going to apply these styles to TH. So in here, if we now say color white, and then background color black, save and refresh, you can now see that the headings are black and the text is white. So these style sheets work procedurally, right, or linear. So it starts from the bottom and it reads all the way down and it adds all the styles up. So it's going to look at TH and TD, and it's going to take these elements in here, it's going to apply them to TH, and then it's going to apply them to TD, and then it's going to keep reading, and it's going to come across TH again. And so it's going to have a look in here, and if these were already defined in here, so if I said in here color red, right, saved and refreshed, you can see the headings still stay white because the color's been defined as red here, but later on in the file it's again being redefined. So color white is now overwriting color red, and background color, obviously because there was no background color before, just fills in the space and goes in. So you don't have to only reference something once. If you've got a big group of things that you want all to have the same colors or same text lines or anything like that, you can explicitly reference them all like that, and then you can use an external one, so you can use another one to go in and target specific elements and just have those change. So I feel like I've explained that absolutely terribly, and I do apologise, but hopefully that starts to give you a little bit of a you know what kind of thing, you know, fill you in if you like. So all of a sudden our table looks absolutely fantastic and is IMDb worthy. So let's send that off. Let's not send that off. So we're going to have a look at block elements. I realise this is getting very long now, but hopefully it's comprehensive. So if you miss anything, you can go back and you can watch some stuff and sort that out. So we're going to have a look at block elements. Obviously, as I said, with P tags are block elements, as said in the HTML crash course. So let's make a P, and we'll give it inline text, because we're going to change that. Right? So we're going to say here is some, and then we're going to make another one and also call this one inline text. So they've both got the same class, and then we're going to say here is some inline paragraph text. Now if we refresh this, that's quite clearly not inline paragraph text, because as I said, P paragraphs are block elements. So the way that we can change that is we go into our styles and we reference inline hyphen text, and then open and close curly brackets and jump back in, and then we can say display inline, right? So that's going to reference both of these P classes because they both have the class of inline text. It's going to display inline them, so when we refresh you can now see they've gone from being block elements to being inline elements, and so it takes away some of the block margin and padding that you'll find, and instead just squeezes everything onto the same line and into each other. Same way with spans. So if we make a span and we call this span block text, in fact let's make 2 of these block texts, and in here we can say here is some block span text. If I refresh this, you can see spans being inline stay inline. And so if you want these to break down onto other lines, onto separate channels, you can say we can reference block text, open close, and we can give it a display of block, right? Although I've done that awfully. There we go, display block, and that will take both of those classes, because both of those spans have the class of block text, and it will push them onto their own blocks. Cool, very nice. Now, a practical example of this would be if you had a blog, right? So if you had an H1 tag, and this was your blog title, and then you had an H3 tag, and this said that it was published, let's say today, so 15, thanks Flux, 15/01/2018. Let's give H1 a class of inline H1. In fact, we can just use our same inline class here. So we just say inline text, and then we can give that same class to H3. So if we refresh this, you can see that our blog title and our published are both on the same line, which traditionally wouldn't happen because H1 and H3 are block level elements. So by default, this line here, this published line, would sit underneath blog title. But because our inline text is having a display of inline applied to these elements, they appear next to each other. So very cool. Another very cool one would be to say, let's give this one a class of hidden, and we say I am hidden. If we refresh this, it's quite obviously not hidden. We can quite clearly see that. But another display that we can do is to say, so we'll reference the class text hidden, and we'll give it a display of hidden, of none. Sorry. So display none, refresh, boom, gone. Where the hidden comes from is visibility. So if you set this element now doesn't exist, this this text hidden class, it's not there, right? It's display none, it's not even in the background. Whereas if you were to set the visibility to hidden, it would still be here. So if there are other things around it, they're still going to be affected by it. You just can't see it. Whereas by saying display none, it completely gets rid of it. So if I had an image here, it would move over and it would sit here, which is handy, I guess, if you're moving things about. I mean, we'll have a look at floats in a second. So you know, that can be quite handy. So I need to like stop talking so fast. I've just realised how quickly I'm talking through all of this stuff. I'll start going a little bit slower now. Let's quickly cover overflow. Obviously, if you've got a so let's quickly set up a P with overflow hidden. I'm going to try and speed these last couple of ones up. So we've got a P with overflow hidden. We've got a P with overflow visible. And then we've got a P with overflow scroll. Let's put some content in here, like this is a really big amount of text that is definitely not going to fit in the div I have made for it. That's not how you spell definitely, but we're going to leave it for now. So let's copy and paste that into the other ones. Refresh this. You can see we've got 3p paragraphs here now. So let's have a look at overflow hidden. So we'll reference overflow hidden, open close curly brackets, and then inside of here, in fact, what we can do is, because we want all these to be the same size, we can say overflow hidden, and then we can also reference overflow visible, and we can also reference overflow scroll. So we're saying, by saying that, we're calling all three of those here. So we can give them all a width of 100 pixels, we can give them all a height of 50 pixels, and we can give them all a background color of grey, just so that we can see where their borders are. Okay, so let's set those up. refresh, and you can see now this is looking awful, right? So let's actually set some padding of 50 pixels on the top and the bottom there to try and separate them out a little bit. It's probably actually going to need a bit more than that. Let's go with 100 pixels. Pad it all out so you can see we've got overflowing content here, right? Now with overflow, you've got, let's say, overflow hidden, open close curly brackets inside of here. The way to hide the overflow, so you can see if you just want the content to be within the bounds of its div, so inside of that grey area, we say overflow colon and then hidden. And what that will do is if we refresh that, you can see that any content that hangs outside of its div, so outside of this 100 by 50 pixels grid, anything that hangs outside of that is going to be hidden. The default is visible, so this next one's a bit useless, but if we say overflow and then visible, open close curly brackets, overflow brackets visible, save and refresh that, you're not going to see any difference here because it's still being displayed. And the third one is if we were to say dot overflow scroll, we can say overflow scroll, right? And if we were to refresh this, you can see that you've now got some scrolls where you can scroll about the content. You can't go left and right because the text is wrapping onto new lines. So that's cool, but a better way to do the scroll one would be to say overflow auto. And so what that will do is if we refresh this, it's only going to put scroll bars in when it needs it, right? So as there's no extra width, it's going to get rid of that first one, but it's going to keep the horizontal one, but it's going to keep the vertical one here because there's still content to be viewed up and down. However, if the content did just fit in here and there was no overflow, this scroll bar wouldn't exist. So it's kind of a good thing to put in just in case, but at the same time, they don't look great and they're not easy to style. So having them set up there's, it's not great, but they do the job in case, just in case you need them. So handy thing to remember. So let's move on to positions. So we've got position relative, fixed, absolute, sticky, all these different positions. We'll cover those really quickly. The first one, we'll make a div of position relative. Inside of here, I am relatively positioned. Let's also make another one, position fixed. And we say I am fixed. We'll make another one, position absolute. We say I am absolutely positioned. And then our last one will say position sticky. There are a few more, but these are the main ones really. I am stuck here. Okay, so we've got our divs. Let's have a look at them. Cool, they look amazing. So relatively positioned. Let's have a quick look at that. So dot position relative. The way that you define a position is by simply saying position. So position and then relative is going to cover position relative. If we refresh this, you'll see nothing's going to happen because relative position is the default value for those anyway, so you won't see any difference there. All divs, all elements that go onto the page are relatively positioned as standard. So so that's kind of that. Let's actually give these a border just so that we can see them. We'll use the concatenation again, so we'll say position relative. We'll also say position absolute. I've done these in a different order, but okay. We'll also say position sticky, and we'll also say position fixed. Let's open up those, and then we'll say we'll give these all a border that's 2 pixels big of solid blue. Let's refresh this, and you can see, so I've misspelt relative, and I've misspelt sticky. because I put an E in the last one, didn't I? Silly sod. Relative. Let's just copy that. Relative into position. Relative. And then sticky into position. Sticky. Why is that one not working then? Because I've misspelled position. See, spelling matters, guys. Right, so we've got borders around them all, and it only goes to show position relative doesn't move, so that was a fantastic waste of time. So the next one that we'll go on to is position fixed. And what position fixed will do is, if we define it as position and then just fixed, we refresh this, you can see it's going to disappear. What? Because it's more than likely going to be fixed to somewhere on the page that we don't want it to be, right? So we're going to define where exactly on the page we want this to be positioned to, and we can do so by setting bottom, top, left, and right. So for this one, we're going to want it fixed at the bottom of the page. So we're going to say bottom 0. This is a pixel count, so you can say 10 pixels here. Save that, refresh, and you can see it's going to move it 10 pixels up from the bottom. If you want it flush, obviously you can just put 0, save, and refresh, and this is going to put it 0. And if we want it to the right as well, we can say right 0. And that will give it 0 pixels of movement to the right as well. So that will just keep it there. And you can see with it being fixed, it just stays in that one place, right? So it doesn't move at all. But you can see there are actually, when it goes over things, you can see other colours. So just to make it look nice, let's add a background colour of white. Let's refresh this, and you can see that now when we go over the other colours, it's not gonna interfere. Cool. So that's position fixed. That keeps an element fixed to the page depending on whatever the top, bottom, left, and rights are set to. And these, remember, are pixel counts. So just for demonstration purposes, let's leave it at 10 pixels for the bottom and the right. Refresh. There we go. Fantastic. The next one that we're going to have a look at is absolute. So absolutely positioned is very handy. Position absolute, position absolute. And what position absolute does is it takes the its parent, right? So in this case, it's going to take the body, and it's going to absolutely position it depending on the pixel count that you give it. Okay, so with absolutely positioned things as well, you can give things widths and heights and things like this. So if we say we want to give it a width of 250 pixels and a height of 100 pixels, save and refresh, you can see that this is the element we're playing about with here. And you can also see when you set different positions to different things, such as fixed down here as well, it does take away the default width, so you do have to redefine those, but that's simple enough to do. And then with the position absolute, so again you can just play about with this. So you can say we want it to be a bottom of 0, refresh, that's going to move it down. We want a right of 0, refresh, this is going to move it along. And we've lost it now, so we need to find it. You got to remember these take into consideration. Here we are. So this is being absolutely positioned based off the window, right? So you can see it's positioned down to the bottom right of the window here, because it's using the body as its parent, right? Now, for something to be absolutely positioned correctly, its parent needs to have a position of relative, right? So if we go over to body, which is in this case its parent, and we say position relative, semicolon, refresh, you're going to see it's going to duck and weave out of here, and instead it's going to move all the way back down to here, absolutely positioned. But one difference between that and fixed, you can see, is that absolutely positioned moves with the page. All right, so as I'm scrolling here, that's also moving. So let's scroll all the way back down in our style sheet here. Let's give it a bottom of 50 pixels and a right of 50 pixels. Refresh that. Just just to move it away, and you can see that that is moving, but you can see that that's overlaying the I am fixed one, and we don't want that to happen. So this is where Z indexes come in if you're in the States, or Z indexes if you speak the Queen's English. So Z-index. If you've ever played or if you ever used 3D software, obviously you've got your X and your Y axis, so this being your X axis, this being your Y axis, and then you've got a Z axis as well, which goes back, right? So imagine it going back into the computer. So we can set a Z index of 1 to this, right? And if we were to refresh this, nothing's going to happen, because we need to set a Z index to fixed as well. So if we set a Z index of 2 to fixed, so 2 obviously is going to appear above 1. If we were to refresh this, you can now see that the I am fixed lettering appears above absolute, because this is a lower Z index or Z index or zebra, or whatever you want to call it, index to the fixed. So pretty cool. The last one, the last position that we're going to cover in today's video, because this has taken absolutely ages, is sticky. So position sticky. So what position sticky does is, if we refresh this, you can't actually see anything that's happening, because it needs to move all the way down. So let's set this to 1200 pixels, just so we've got a bit more room to play with. And that, oh, for goodness sake, that's not even enough. I have a feeling I've misspelt this. Is that right? Okay, so this sticky one took a little bit of figuring out. It was working earlier, and then of course I've broken it. So let's move on. So with sticky, obviously you can see now that it's being stuck to the top of the page here. Let's quickly set a background color to this. So background color white. Refresh, so that when it scrolls over, you can see that it is clearly being stuck there. And the way that we're defining this is by position sticky, and then we're giving it a top. So this top is basically saying become sticky at this point. So by saying stickies, or top 0, sorry, it's saying when the viewport is right at the top of the page, which is exactly where it is when the page is first loaded, that's then initiating the sticky. However, if we set the top to 50 pixels instead and refresh, you can see it's not until we get to 50 pixels, or sorry, that it is it's 50 pixels down from the top with its position. So useful for nav bars, useful for useful for nav bars, I guess. I can't really think of another use for a sticky bar, but there we go. That's it. That is a sticky bar, and that's how it works. So let's quickly drop this down to 500 again. And we're going to wrap up here very quickly, and we're going to take a quick look at some final bits that I've got written down here. Final bit number 1, floating. And then we're going to have a quick look at descendants as well. So let's scroll down to the bottom of here. I've also moved the position sticky up to the top here, so that it's actually getting picked up. Because obviously, if you've got to scroll all the way down to the bottom, it's not then until you're gonna get the old sticky. Right. So float image. Let's bring in our last image here. So sign.jpg, and out of a footpath sign. And then directly underneath this image, we can just start typing. So we're going to say, here is a footpath sign from the countryside of good old England. It is used to direct people as to where they are going. So the first thing that we're gonna want to do is, if we refresh this, you can see that this image is absolutely ginormous. So let's go over to the styles. Let's target float image, and then inside of there we're going to target the image attribute, and we're going to give it a fixed width of 100 pixels. Let's save and refresh that, and you can see that we've now got our image, which is 100 pixels wide. Let's also give some styling to the actual div itself. So we'll say float image. Let's give it a border of 1 pixels of solid blue. Let's give it a width of 300 pixels. So if we refresh this, you can see that we've now got a nice little container going on here. But the image doesn't look very good. And the simple way to fix this is we can say float. So if we say float right, and then refresh, you can see the image is going to float to the right of the container, and the text is going to dynamically update around it. So if we just copy this text here and we paste it in again, save and refresh, you can see the text is going to wrap around that image because it's being floated. If we were to then say float left, save and refresh, you can see obviously now the image floats to the left and the text does the same thing, it works itself around. So that's very handy. You can demonstrate your floating skills in a blog more than likely, because that is the primary place where you're going to have a lot of content, a lot of images, and so working around those two takes quite a bit. So let's head back into our index now. The last thing that we're going to have a look at are descendants and nth terms and things like this. So let's have an h3 and call it descendants, and then inside of this HD we're going to have a class called child, and then inside of here let's have a paragraph, and let's say I am a child of this div, and then inside of here let's have an inner child, and we'll say I am we'll say but I am a child of another div, and we're going to wrap this in p tags. Okay, so if we refresh this, you can see we've got descendants, and then I'm a child of this div, but I'm a child of another div. By that meaning this p is a child of the div class, but this p is a child of the div inner child. So if we go into our styles and we say dot child, and then we use the arrow marker here, so the small little arrow like that, and we say p, we can then say color red. So if we save this and refresh, you can see that although earlier it was the case that we were referencing all the p tags inside of that class, now what's happening, so I just hit the mic, now what's happening instead is it's directing itself to look at the p tags that are only nested within this div specifically, right? And so because this p is outside of that child, or outside of that div, sorry, and inside of another div here called inner child, it's not going to get picked up. So the only way in which we can pick that up is by removing that arrow. And if we save that and refresh this page now, you'll see that they both get picked up as being red, because now it's saying just look at any p that's inside of here, not specifically just the ones that are nested immediately inside of the div. So that's handy for if you doing a big paragraph, and if you have something else going in on the inside of that paragraph, you can use that to just target a specific place. So let's have a look at adjacent siblings. Adjacent, I spelt wrong, but oh well. Siblings. And then in here let's have dot adjacent sibling. So we've got div with a class of adjacent sibling, and then we'll have a paragraph inside of here that says I am a child of this div, and then outside of that div we'll have another couple of paragraphs where it says but I am the first sibling, and then another one that says and I am the second. right? So if we refresh this, we've now got another one, adjacent siblings. I'm a child of this div, which is adjacent sibling, and then outside of that div we have another 2 paragraphs that are I'm the first sibling and I'm the second. Okay, so obviously a sibling, if you know how a family works, sibling would be your brother, your sister. So in actual fact we're referring these as being equal to those divs, whereas a child would be below obviously a child of that div. And so if we wanted to target, say, this P paragraph, but we had to target it for some reason using this div that was above it, the way that we can do that is by using a plus symbol. So we can say dot adjacent sibling plus P. Let's set the font color. We don't need to say font color, it's just font. Color even. God, I'm losing my mind. I've been doing this for so long. Adjacent sibling plus P, we're going to change to color green. So if we refresh this, you can see the first P paragraph after the div has been changed to the color green, which is fantastic, right? But what if you want all the siblings of that div to have the color green? Well, then you simply change this to the little squiggly sign that you see there, which basically means general sibling. So if we were to refresh this now, you can see that these are both being shown up in green because they are both general siblings of that div, the higher div that sits above it. So that's also cool. Now the last thing, we're almost there, the last thing that I'm going to have a look at is first child and the nth term. So let's say nth container, and inside of here we're going to have 3 paragraphs, and this is going to be number 1, then we'll have number 2, and we'll have number 3. Refresh this, you can now see we've got number 1, 2 and 3. Now say we want just the first paragraph element inside of this nth container to be targeted. We can do so by saying dot nth container, so we're referencing the element there, and then after the div, and then after it we're just going to say first hyphen child as a pseudo element, much in the same way as we had hover and active earlier. So we're saying look at the nth container and pick out the first child, right? Or in fact we need the P there, sorry, because otherwise it will be looked to find. So anyway, let's move on. It will be looking for the first P child inside of nth container. If you had dot nth container colon first child, it would look for the first nth container. Okay, so in this case we are looking through nth container here, we're looking through all these elements and we're finding the first P child here, and let's set the color to blue, save and refresh, and obviously that hasn't worked because I've misspelt something somewhere, so let me find where I've misspelt that. Bet you anything it's nth container, no, P, first child, color blue, save. Wait, is that, no sorry, that has actually changed to blue, I just can't see it. Has it? Yeah, it has. So oh, Jesus Christ, I'm going loony. So it has changed to blue, so that has picked up the first so this has picked up the first element, so the first P tag, and it's changed the color to blue. Now what if we only want to target the second one here, and we want to target the second one and change that to red? Well, you can use the nth child for that. So we can say dot nth container P colon nth hyphen child, and then this takes a parameter, so you put some brackets and we'll say 2. So we're saying look inside nth container, find all the paragraphs and pick out the second one and change the color of that to red. So if we refresh that, you can see it's now looking through all of those P tags, and it's going to find the second one and it's going to change the color of it to red. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is CSS. There are some more advanced things you can do with CSS, such as flexbox and before and after elements and media queries. I will cover all of those in future videos, but I think you can appreciate this video has gone on for quite a while now. But I hope that it's given you a bit of an insight into what CSS can do and how it really plays a fundamental role in building websites. Obviously, all this code I'm going to go through and I'm going to neaten it all up, and I'm going to provide it as a download link in the description. So just head over to the courses page on websitebytes.uk and you'll be able to download the course project files direct from there then, all zipped up and ready for you to use and have a play about with and see what you can come up with. So I appreciate it's been a very long video, so if you made it all the way through to the end, congratulations, thank you very much. I really didn't expect you to, but hopefully you've learned a lot. So if you did, subscribe to the channel for our PHP and JavaScript crash courses coming up, as well as maybe Bootstrap. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I guess I'm going to go and edit this and then fall asleep, I think. So thank you very much for watching again, and I'll see you in the next one. Toodaloo.